Case 623 by Danny Yu. Chapter 15. You would risk keeping the asset out of cryo for 9 months without, I assume, the option of a wipe.
I would.
Tony should have listened. He should have actually stopped to listen to what Happy had been saying. Shouldn't have just been amused and missing him and trying to invite him for Christmas. And what even was happening? Accepting Happy's transfer to head of security had been specifically so he wouldn't get hurt because he was ridiculously loyal and Tony was getting in situations way out of Happy's depth these days. He was only half aware of asking Bruce to look after Jamie, getting in a suit, and setting off for California. Wasn't really fully aware of much of anything until he found himself in Happy's hospital room, and then it all came crashing into him. Happy's face swollen and discolored, and not for protecting Tony, but for trying to do the right thing, for following a hunch Tony hadn't even been willing to listen to. He could hear the humming and beeping of the machines, could see where everything was hooked up to Happy's body, and something inside him twisted and painful. He was vaguely aware of talking to the nurse, trying to make sure Happy would be comfortable, hyper-aware when he read the medical chart and noted all the damage. Fighting down the sudden lump in his throat was physically painful. He had to put his hands in his pockets to keep them from shaking as he made sure the SI security guys were clear on their task. Then he went back and sat down by Happy's bedside and just sat there. Tried to figure out what the hell had just happened. He'd tracked what Happy had been up to, what plate it was he'd been tracking, everything. He'd even, in the suit coming down, looked up Killian. Not that there was a hell of a lot to find. Well, AIM was doing well, but nothing seemed particularly underhanded, definitely not linked to the Mandarin, and the terrorist attacks that had been wrecking the West Coast. The Avengers should have been brought in sooner, or Tony should have. He should have looked into it, should have tried to figure out what was going on before everything went to hell in the Chinese theater. Shouldn't have let Rhodey talk him down. Sure shouldn't have let Happy follow up on his gut in this instance. Just... fuck! A hand settled on his shoulder, delicate fingers squeezing. He glanced up, attempted to smile at Pepper, and didn't quite manage.
This isn't your fault, she said, voice gentle. You know that, don't you?
Tony shrugged. Should have done something, he said.
You can't fix the whole world, Tony, Pepper said. You can't always keep everyone safe.
And for a moment he needed to be back in New York, needed to see Jamie, make absolutely certain he was safe. Tony had to swallow again, pushing down that urge. He'd be back soon enough, and until then Jamie literally had the Hulk for a babysitter. He was safe. Nothing would happen to him. He likes you, you know, he said. You know that, right? A faint blush dusted her cheeks.
How is he?
She asked. Tony lifted off the medical chart in layman's terms and felt no better for it whatsoever. Tony stared at the sea of phones and mics and cameras all stuck in his face, and the guilt and fear and everything he'd been trying to slog through all coalesced into rage. How could all these people just... How was he the story here? He wasn't the one who got hurt. He wasn't the Mandarin. Why was he the one they all descended on? He took a deep breath. Because he was Tony Stark. Yes, but maybe also because he was Iron Man. Maybe they wanted him to make them feel better. Maybe he was supposed to. I've been told to stay out of this, he said. Then it was business as usual for our military and law enforcement to deal with. But that can only go so far. You don't keep throwing rocks at something if you've got missiles. It's time to bring the big guns out this time. And I tell the Mandarin to start looking over his shoulder. We're coming for him.
With that, he stepped into the suit, felt it close around him, and shot up into the sky.
Sir, Jarvis said as Tony came in for the landing, I feel I should advise you that Captain Rogers showed up at Stock Tower approximately 2.5 hours ago. Tony blinked. Frowned. Could you find him a room for me? He asked, ever so slightly confused. It wasn't Christmas yet, not for another week at least. This wasn't just punctual, this was someone who had been looking for an excuse to be anywhere but where he had been and jumped at the chance the moment he got it, as though it was about to be taken away from him. Tony really hated the fact that he understood people a lot better than he preferred to let on. Where had the Cap even been since the Battle of New York? Couldn't he have waited just another couple of days until Tony had the energy to... Well, mostly until Happy was better and Tony could think straight again. Still, he landed on the roof and let the mechanisms strip off the armor, made his way into the penthouse, and stopped short. somehow, in the less than a day he'd been gone, every bit of tinsel and other decorative festive bit of silliness had moved itself from the boxes and onto the walls, which... How did that even... Tony blinked. Holy shit, he said. Roger's head popped out from behind some decoration or other, and it was all Tony could do to keep from jumping in shock. "Yes, look," Rogers was saying, reaching up to rub at the back of his neck. "Thank you so much for the invitation, and, I hope you don't mind." He gestured at the room as a whole. Tony blinked again, trying to get his brain back up to speed. "I think we just figured out what your real superpower is," he said at last. "Thanks for that. I was going to use the suit." Rogers looked positively horrified. "I hope Jarvis helped you find a room," Tony said. "There should be a couple of suites down on Bruce's level." "Yeah," Roger said. "Yeah, sure." He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he added, "for just showing up. He trailed off, and Tony was struck again by the whole damn thought of what it must be like displaced in time with nowhere and no one, and Tony didn't not have the emotional capacity to think through that. "It's fine," he said, waving a hand dismissively, "and God, since when did he get in the business of picking up strays? We were just talking about you yesterday, actually." "Oh?" Roger said, and he looked so disgustingly touched that Tony couldn't quite help but feel a pang of something. "Yeah," Tony said. "Turns out I have no idea how to explain Christmas to my son. Seemed right up your alley." Rogers blinked, and Tony muttered some excuse or other before making himself scarce. "Feel free to use the kitchen," he called over his shoulder. "And if there's anything you need that we haven't got, just tell Jarvis." He walked down the hallway, stopped, and knocked on Jamie's door. "You in there, kid?" he asked, sliding the door open. Sure, the knocking thing was good manners and should be passed on, but Jamie was at least a good 5 years away from actually having to answer before Tony stuck his nose inside. Jamie glanced up at him. There was something strange about his expression, almost sullen, which was extremely unlike him. Then he turned his attention back to the holographic game he was playing, narrow shoulders oddly tense. Jamie shrugged. Tony frowned, suddenly uncertain. Jamie wasn't acting like Jamie at all, and it was beyond disconcerting. "Roger's finished up the decorations," he said. "You want to come see?" Jamie shrugged, but didn't really take the time to remove his attention from the game. And that was definitely odd. He'd been way into those damn decorations yesterday before Tony left. Tony moved further into the room, sat down on the floor next to Jamie. "Is this about Rogers?" he asked. "Did you not want him to come?" "Don't care," Jamie muttered, and yet that was definitely more sullenness than Tony wanted to deal with, let alone nearly a full decade before his son was supposed to be a damn teenager. "You feeling okay?" Tony asked, leaning in closer and wrapping an arm around Jamie, giving him a quick hug. He returned that, at least. "Is this about Happy?" As much as he tried to make sure Jamie wouldn't know, the kid was observant and had been in the room for the beginning of Pepper's phone call. He'd know something was wrong. "Because Happy's gonna be okay, Jamie. All the doctors told me so." Jamie shrugged again. "People get hurt when they stick their noses where they don't belong," he said, voice oddly tight, and Tony felt an odd kind of twist in the pit of his stomach. "Jarvis, save progress and turn off the game," he instructed before swooping Jamie up into his arms. For a moment, all he could bring himself to do was clutch his son to his chest as close and tight as he dared. Where had that even come from? "I was playing that!" Jamie protested, but his fingers were clenched in Tony's shirt, the top of his head nudging Tony's chin as he burrowed into his neck. His voice was shaky, and Tony felt another twist in response. Something had to have gone wrong. Someone in his daycare must have said something, or one of his teachers, or hell, even Bruce. Tony was sure Jarvis wouldn't have let him hear any of that from the media or anything in the apartment, and right now that didn't matter. What mattered was making sure that notion was erased, completely and utterly. Only problem was he had absolutely no idea how. Because it was true, wasn't it? Trying to do good did put people at risk, except if no one else ever stuck their noses where other people say they don't belong, we'd all get hurt, he said. And sometimes being hurt is worth making sure we know what's going on, and trying to do the right thing about it. "Happy got hurt," Jamie said, and his voice was definitely shaking now. He sniffled on the verge of sobbing with it. Maria says it's his own fault. He shouldn't get into other people's stuff. Daddy, why did Happy get hurt? Tony swallowed down the sudden lump in his throat. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressed his face into his son's soft hair for a moment. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, even when they're just trying to do good stuff. He said, it's not fair, but there are bad people out there, and they don't care about fair. They don't care that they hurt people. They don't care that they hurt Happy. But that just means we gotta fight harder, because they don't get to win. I don't care, Jamie declared, and he was speaking through sobs this time. I just want Happy to be okay. Tony ran his hand up and down Jamie's small back, wished he knew the right words, wished to God he could just make everything okay. For Happy, for Jamie, for everyone. A whole hell of a lot easier said than done, that. How about we go look at the Christmas decorations? He asked. We can take a picture, send it to Happy. That way, when he's done sleeping, he can see how nice it all looks. There was a long pause where Jamie didn't say anything at all. Then, okay. And it was so small, so weak, Tony didn't know what to do with it. How had he never realized how frightening all of this must be to his son? How had he not stopped to realize that Jamie was getting old enough to start understanding just a bit too much, and not necessarily the right parts? For now, at least, it seemed like disaster averted.